Welcome, everyone, to another episode of your favorite sitcom, The Robeytech Show, starring me, Justin Robey. Today we're looking at a laptop we hope makes some noise in the industry, the Gigabyte AERO 17. It's a creator laptop that says it promises to do all that we need. Well, what I need right now is GPUs. Let's find out what else it does right here, right there, not over there, but right now, not tomorrow, on The Robeytech Show. Too much? Looking for an impeccable and game-changing NVMe SSD for your gaming experience? Then take a look at the Viper VP4300 Gen 4 NVMe SSD from Patriot. With read speeds up to 7,400 megabytes per second and write speeds to 6,800 megabytes per second, this insanely fast drive will provide you the reliability you need across your gaming and multitasking experiences. With maximum endurance, two heat shield options, the Viper VP4300 will equip your system with the look, performance, and reliability you need. Get the Viper VP4300 today by checking out the link in the description below. Creator laptops were designed to benefit those who are involved with heavy-duty content creation. With the popularity of smartphones and streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Peacock, still shaking my head on that one, the need for content that is high quality is also getting stronger. People every day are jumping into the content creation game personally and even professionally more and more. Your everyday laptop cannot fulfill the needs of creators. So manufacturers decided to introduce the Creator laptop that promises better efficiency for creators' overall demands. Now that's not to say that everyday laptops you shouldn't buy. In fact, there are some great deals you can find on Robeytech Deals Twitter and also robeytechdeals.com on laptops given it's the holiday season. But just know that these laptops are not recommended for content creation, 3D rendering, audio video editing, graphic design, or even video game development. Those take some very special specs / hardware configurations to do so fluently and efficiently. But Robey, I can just build a killer desktop for all that, right? Of course you can. But what about those times you need to take your work on the go and collab with other people? I know, safely of course, but it's becoming more normal again. And if you're gonna get out there, you need something that basically you can carry. And you can't really carry a desktop everywhere, right? Well, probably not. I mean, there are probably a lot of you who are like, look at me lifting the desktop, look at me carry the whole thing around, and that would be very impressive. Now, when it comes to creator laptops, the one that I'm talking about specifically is the Gigabyte AERO 17. It's a simple name. Now, there are many laptops out there that can do rendering, handle seamless workflows, and even ray tracing VR applications such as the Dell XPS 17, the Asus ZenBook Pro Duo 15, or even the MacBook Pro, if you want to spend over $5K or even $6K to match the specs of some of the others. So where does the Gigabyte AERO 17 fall in all of this? Can I game on it too? Well, let's find out. Now, before we jump into our testing, let's do a quick overview of the specs on the Gigabyte AERO 17 and how you can configure it. For starters, the Gigabyte AERO 17 comes in two variations that you can configure from there. There's the Gigabyte AERO 17 HDR XD and the HDR YD. So far, the only differences we can tell between the XD and YD are the CPU and GPU and RAM, which, now that I come to think of it, that's actually quite a bit of differences. Both can be configured with an 11th Gen i7-11800H mobile CPU, with the YD version also being able to upgrade to the 11th Gen i9-11980HK. They come with Windows 10, a firmware-based TPM, so both can support a free upgrade to Windows 11. Yay or nay, depending on how you feel about that. Now, both have a 17.3-inch thin bezel 4K 3840 by 2160 UHD IPS anti-glare display that is crystal clear, and both support 100% Adobe RGB, which really makes all of the colors come to life. I can't say enough good things about the screen on this, as there is a lot to love. The biggest downfall of the screen, though, is that it maxes out at 60 Hz. But when you're doing video editing or rendering, you don't have to have 165 Hz or anything above 60 Hz because it'll be just fine. Now, if you're looking to game on it, then you'll be scratching your head at the screen because you might be better off buying something like a pure gaming laptop such as the Razer Blade 14, and you can check out our full review of that right here. Now don't worry, we did run some games on it to test, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. Now the Gigabyte AERO 17 HDR XD and YD both have DDR4 slots, where the XD version comes with 2x8 and 16 gigs, and the YD version comes by 2x16 with 32 gigs. Both clocked at 3200 MHz, and the laptop will support up to 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM. To note, the RAM is upgradable, which is great. The Gigabyte recommends looking at its website to make sure it's compatible, just like any QVL you've looked at before. And for those of you who don't know what QVL is, that's Qualified Vendor List. Now for graphics, both CPUs come with Intel's UHD graphics, but they also come with a dedicated mobile GPU. The XD comes with an 8GB DDR6 mobile GeForce RTX 3070, and the YD comes with either a 8GB DDR6 or 16GB DDR6 NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 mobile. Both laptops have their respective GPUs supporting NVIDIA's 3rd Gen Max-Q technology, such as Dynamic Boost 2.0, which auto-delivers the needed power between the CPU and GPU for a performance boost. Resizable bar, which enables the CPU to access the entire GPU frame buffer at once to improve gaming performance. And finally, DLSS, which delivers a performance boost at the same power by using tensor cores for groundbreaking AI rendering. Both laptops come with two M.2 NVMe slots that support either Gen 3 or Gen 4 NVMe's. The XD usually comes with a 1TB NVMe SSD, and the YD comes with two, one that's 512 and one that's 1TB. Now these are upgradable. Again, you just need to stay within the certain PCIe specs. All right, now that we've covered all the internals of the Gigabyte AERO 17 HDR, both XD and YD, let's take a look at the outside. The laptop comes in one color, and that's black. It's simple enough, I guess, but I'd like to have seen it come in like a silver mode or something else to give it a little bit more variation. But hey, I don't make them, I just review them. The dimensions of this laptop are as you would expect any creator or gaming laptop that has a 17-inch screen to be. It's about 15.6 inches wide, 10.63 inches deep, and around 1 inch in height. It also comes in around at 6.5. And again, most 17-inch gaming creator laptops are around this size and weight. Some are even heavier. Now the AERO 17 is a laptop that is made of plastic all around, so it doesn't have that premium aluminum feel like the Razer Book or MacBook Pros do. And the price tag on it starts at $2,200 and goes all the way up to $4,000. But places such as Newegg have been running specials on them lately with rebate cards, and we've seen versions as low as $1,900 to $2,800 for the models that are available. I guess it's what's on the inside that counts, right? Now we'll find out if it's worth that in just a few minutes, but for now, let's talk about ports. For the AERO 17, both models come with the same port configuration. That's 3 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, 1 Thunderbolt 4 Type C port, 1 HDMI 2.1, yay, 1 mini DisplayPort 1.4, also yay, a 3.5-inch millimeter headphone out, a 3.5-inch millimeter mic in, UHS-2 SD card reader, a DC in for your power cord, and that one RJ45 jack for hardwiring your laptop, which supports a jack up to 2.5 gigabits per second. By the way, all versions of the Gigabyte AERO 17 support wireless-AX Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth version 5.2. There is a built-in webcam, and that's not in the position you'd think it's in. It's at the top of the base where the laptop is open, just above where the power button is. There is a shutter on it, so you can close the webcam when you aren't using it. I don't really care for the webcam in this position. Say I'm like working on a project remotely and I'm collaborating with someone and they need a video call through Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or whatever. The other person is either constantly looking at my chin and my nose if I'm not directly looking at the camera. Much like Blondie But Geeky has me check my nose hairs during many of my live streams. Maybe this would be ideal for that. By the way, the other problem is the webcam isn't any good. So it's not only is it not placed well, but it's fuzzy. The colors are a bit washed out, which we found during some of our calls we made and the pictures we took. Did I also mention that the webcam's just placed in a horrible location? Okay, well let's talk about audio. The AERO 17 comes with 2x2 watt speakers that crackled when sound was turned up to around 90, so we didn't go any further. They're also tinny in terms of their sound, and the bass is really not very deep. You're better off buying a set of USB powered speakers or Bluetooth speakers if you really want good sound here. And before I talk about keyboard and trackpad, your battery is a lithium polymer 99 watt battery, and the adapter is 230 watts. It's a large 2-piece adapter with a power brick that is the size of the iPhone 13 Pro Max in height and about 2 or 3 iPhone 13 Pro Maxes in thickness in comparison. It's a good use for an iPhone 13. All right, the keyboard is a full-size keyboard with a Gigabyte Fusion /Control Center controlled RGB per key that is of course backlit. Without Control Center installed, it defaults to a rainbow wave type of lighting, so bajillions of FPS just at your fingertips. Now you can turn it off by holding the function key and pressing down the spacebar. When you do press the function keys, you'll also notice that the function keys such as F1 to F12, pause, delete, home, and the num block light up bright white. What would have been nice to have is if you could have pressed the same function key and all the other key lights shut off, such as the Razorbook 13 did. The reason for this is that if you decide that you just want to have a white lighting on your keyboard, nothing will stand out when pressing that function key. Just something little I noticed and wanted to share. It's not a deal breaker by any means, but more of a little nuance. I mentioned Gigabyte Control Center for the AERO 17. It's very intuitive, so let's cover the basics, and if you want to know more, you can just check out the link down in the description below. Now the basics of Control Center are to control things such as fan curves, fan speed, keyboard lights, and performance variables. You can also monitor things such as CPU, GPU, battery, and storage usage from within it. Lastly, there are a bunch of options in here to customize the laptop to however you want. We found out that Gigabyte's Control Center can change Windows settings such as the power plan, which in return changes other settings. During our testing, we found that we had to remove the Gigabyte Control Center to create a better experience. That doesn't mean that Control Center is completely bad, it just means that for what we wanted to do and the tests we wanted to perform, it became more of a hassle than a help. Now, if you have this laptop or you plan on purchasing, let us know how your Control Center worked in the comments below. Now, hold on. Did I mention that the webcam is in a horrible position? I don't remember. Did I mention that? Okay. Now the trackpad on the AERO 17 is on the smaller side, but I expect most people who use laptops like this will be using an external wired or wireless mouse, and there are external ports to support one and still have ports left over for peripherals such as like your capture card, your Elgato HD60S Plus, or your Blue Yeti USB powered microphone, or even an external webcam, which I highly recommend, because did I tell you that the webcam is in a really terrible... Now on the trackpad there is a fingerprint sensor that works pretty well, but is positioned kind of in a weird location. It's in the upper left corner of the trackpad. So when you're signing in, you may want to use your left index finger, as it will be a little bit more natural using that versus reaching across the trackpad and using your right index finger. It's also very sensitive. As I am writing this review on the laptop, I found that my hands were constantly moving the cursor around as I was trying to type. Sure, I could have gone in and disabled the trackpad to type, but I would have liked to have seen it indented a little bit more into the base rather than have it just kind of flat on the surface. Again, not a deal breaker, but another nuance for me. But the more the nuances add up, it potentially could be a deal breaker, like a nuanced Voltron that kind of completes, now, I'm a deal breaker. There you have it, all the specs and features inside and out of the Gigabyte AERO XD and YD versions. Now let's look at how it performs. First, let's go over the model we tested. We got the Gigabyte AERO 17 YD version with the i9-11980. It's got the 3080 with 16 gigs and a 32 gig configuration at 3200 megahertz, so basically the top end. The first couple tests we did on the monitor itself was just a test for ghosting on our UFO test and heat dissipation. Let's discuss the monitor test. As we've done quite a few of these reviews on monitors and laptop now, I hope you know what the UFO test is all about. Just a quick refresher, the UFO ghosting test measures blur trails along with artifacts that can be seen on the screen during higher frame rates. As you can see from the UFO test, and given the fact that this monitor is only 60 Hz, it didn't do very well. Comparing it to our test of the Razer Blade 14 we recently reviewed, you can see that the Razer Blade 14 has a lot less ghosting and blur trails behind the UFO. Now I know you're saying, Robey, does this mean that gaming on it is going to be a poor experience? The answer is, more than likely, given you have a 60 Hz monitor and this laptop has been engineered more for content creators and less for gamers, you may see some struggles in the games that you want to play, as this is pure 60 Hz from a panel perspective. You'll be better off gaming on a pure gaming laptop like the aforementioned Razer Blade 14 or some of the other products from Gigabyte's Aorus line of gaming laptops. Okay, let's have a look at the temps and how the AERO 17 performs under load for CPU and GPU. For our CPU thermal test, we came to an average of 53 at idle. Pretty standard for a laptop with that much muscle in it. Would have liked to have seen an average idle temp of closer to 50, but 53 degrees is respectable. Now under load, during our soak test in AIDA64, we saw the CPU jump up to an average of 88 degrees and maxing out in 93 degrees. During this test, we saw various amounts of thermal throttling when this laptop CPU got between 80 and 90 degrees. And this didn't happen just once. It happened multiple times during our testing to the point where we almost couldn't test everything. The cooling in the laptop is called the WindForce Infinity Next Gen Cooling for Laptop. So it's got a really cool name, meaning it must perform with its two 71 blade fans, 5 heat pipes, and copper heat fins that are supposed to increase overall heat dissipation by 30% compared to their previous generation laptop. We don't know if it's a configuration issue and how it's all set up underneath, but the cooling wasn't impressive, and as a matter of fact, it just wasn't good. Compared to the Razer Blade 14 with Razer's vapor chamber cooling, which, I mean, that's about to figure out who has the cooler name, the Razer was 10 degrees Celsius cooler for the CPU on average at 80 degrees. The GPU, however, was a different story. It stayed cool under load at 70 degrees Celsius and idled around 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. Now, when we were testing the GPU load, you could definitely hear the fans kick on to increase the cooling, so the WindForce cooling I mentioned earlier seemed to be more for the GPU than potentially for the CPU. Now, Gigabyte doesn't give too much information about their cooling system in the laptop, so we're only kind of speculating as to what it's for. But given this is a content creator laptop and potentially be using a lot more programs that are heavy in CPU intensity versus GPU, we feel that Gigabyte didn't put their best foot forward here and probably are overcooling kind of the wrong thing maybe? I don't know. Now, for the CPU benchmarks for the Intel 11980HK we tested, there were some eye-openers here, and in a moment you'll see what I'm saying. We did your typical Cinebench R23, which scored an average of 1523 out of the 3 runs for our single core, which puts the CPU just under an AMD Ryzen 7 5800X, which tested at 1594, and above the Ryzen 9 5900HX, which we tested in the Razer Blade 14, that came in at 1461. For multi-core, we got an average of 131115 for 3 runs. This again bested the Ryzen 9 5900HX and the Razer Blade 14, which came in at 11886 on average. And comparing it to the desktop for context, it checks in just under the AMD Ryzen 5700G, which according to CPU-monkey.com on the Cinebench benchmark list comes in at 14211. It's also below the Intel 11700K, which came in at 15011. Now, the 3D Mark CPU Profile 1.0 was another test we decided to run, since this test is up and coming and more people are relying on the information from this test. We covered this in our Razer Blade review for the AMD Ryzen 9 5900HX, and that came in on an average of 6571 at max threads. For this Intel i9 11980HK, we got an average of 7530 at max threads. The Intel CPU tops the charts in CPU Profile 1 throughout the list we found on 3D Mark's site. The CPU performance is definitely there, but the construction around the cooling for this CPU in this laptop just isn't. And that's really sad to say. Now, throughout this review, I mentioned that the laptop is mainly for content creators and it's marketing and geared toward being a creator laptop. We did, however, run our typical gauntlet of games. We ran Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Metro Exodus, Apex Legends, Call of Duty, Fortnite. You can check out those benchmarks right here. Let's discuss the games a little and how they perform. Now, for our scores and something to compare it to, we put this up against the Razer Blade 14 with an AMD Ryzen 9 5900HX and an RTX 3070. On the Aero 17, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, with the highest preset at 1920 by 1200, we were able to get an average of 80 frames per second here. Compare that to the Razer Blade 14, we got 77 frames per second, which is only a 3 FPS difference between the two. Sticking with the single-player games, we ran Metro Exodus at 1440p with ray tracing on high and DLSS set to balance, and we were able to get a score of 44 frames per second on average. Comparing that to the Razer Blade 14, which came in at 40.41, so you see a 4 frames per second increase. Dirt 5, which is our biggest increase with our single-player game test, it came in at 71.77 frames per second on the average of 3 runs, while the Razer came in at 53 frames per second, so almost a 20 frame per second increase. Finally, Borderlands 3, rounding out our single-player games, we saw a decrease at 57.26 for the Aero 17, and the Razer Blade was actually at 67, so that's a 10 frames per second difference there in favor of the Razer. Now, for the first-person shooter games, the scores are very different from our single-player test, as on all of these games, we did low visual settings and at 1440p, both on the Aero 17 and the Razer Blade 14. Same 3-run test, and we compiled an average. For the Aero, Apex Legends came in at 153 frames per second, and the Razer at 131. So a 22 frame per second difference, and that's what we wanted to see when jumping from a 3070 in the Razer to a 3080 in the Aero. For Call of Duty, the Aero came in at 107, and the Razer 103. Not too big of a jump here, and especially coming off of the Apex test, we would have liked to have seen it higher. But COD doesn't do a very good job in optimizing really pretty much anything. Now finally for Fortnite on the AERO 17, we just got under 200 frames per second at 198 compared to the Razer where we got 160. Remember, Fortnite kind of runs on a potato, so the fact that there was a 40 frame per second jump isn't really all that surprising. But Robey, these are good game scores, so why can't I buy this as a gaming laptop? Well, your biggest downfall here is the 60Hz screen. If you're attempting to play a lot of games on it with that 60Hz screen, the GPU is outputting more frames per second than the monitor can display, so you're running into tearing during your gameplay. Alright, now that I've covered everything there is to know about the Gigabyte AERO 17 laptop, do I recommend it and should you buy it? To be completely honest, I don't know if I can recommend this laptop, even for content creation. This is mainly due to a bunch of nuances. One of them is the price. You're looking at spending north of $3,000 on a creator laptop, and when you're spending your hard-earned money north of $3,000, then you don't want any issues with what you're buying. The thermal throttling we came across just running tests were enough for me to take a step back. That's a huge issue, and when you're in the middle of creating content, the last thing you want is your laptop, your desktop, your phone, or whatever you're using to overheat and then just stop working. Now, you're not going to be making a whole lot of content that way if it's just shutting off. Now, you're better off buying like the Dell XPS 17 or the Asus ZenBook Pro Duo 15 OLED, or even a MacBook for that price. You're gonna get more out of these, and you shouldn't come across many of the issues that came with the AERO 17, based on the reviews we have read. Unfortunately, Dell, Asus, Apple, maybe send us a few, and we can compare. But it's not about what we think, it's about what you think. What did you think of this review? It's one of our few content creation laptop reviews, and we'd love to know if we covered everything you want to know about. Is there things that you wish we had covered more of? Are there things that you wish we covered less? Let us know all of that down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button with that like button and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we post a video or go live right here on Robeytech. Also, come join our incredible community over at discord.gg/Robeytech. This is where we talk about PC builds, laptop reviews, monitor reviews, you name it. If you're passionate about it, we more than likely talk about it. Also, if you're looking for great deals coming into the holiday season, follow us over at Robeytech Deals on Twitter or follow us over at robeytechdeals.com. Tom is also looking for the best deals, and honestly, you're gonna save some money if you're going into the holiday season, whether that's on electronics, televisions, games, PC components, you name it. Also, if you're wanting to follow us on all the socials, we're at Robeytech anywhere. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Oh, hold on. Did I mention that the webcam is in a horrible position?